Welcome to the Notes to My Legal Self, AI Insights, where law and AI collide. Get ready to level up your legal game with us. We've got career advice, cutting-edge developments, mind-blowing legal tech, and more. Know someone making waves in the legal AI world? Nominate them, or even nominate yourself. We love courageous souls. And don't forget, we want to hear from you too. Ask questions, drop comments. Let's build a community of legal superheroes. But here's the deal. We're all about to have a blast. AI may be serious, but we're here to make it fun. So buckle up, get ready to power up, and let's embark on this exciting journey together. Now, let's introduce your fearless host, Olga Mack. Get ready to dive into the awesomeness of Notes to My Legal Self, AI Insights. Let's go.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Notes to My Legal Self. I'm Olga Mack. I'm really excited to have this conversation. And what I noticed is that a few of you can't wait too. Yes, I scheduled on top of the hour, but we always appear 10 minutes after. And that gives me an opportunity to actually prepare guests. This is not a scripted show. This is a show where I give you in-flight instructions 10 minutes before we go live, and we go live. So what you are seeing is exactly what you're getting, and there is no script. There is just a conversation. So thank you for your patience, and I am glad that you will become a regular guest. So without further ado, I have fantastic guests on my show today. This is going to be a deep and important conversation, and yes, we will be geeking out. I recently met Rayan and Langston and deeply impressed with their expertise and passion for lawyers and helping them. So I decided to have this conversation with them, and we'll invite you to ask questions as well. Rayan and Langston, without further ado, please introduce yourselves.
Yeah, everyone. First of all, Olga, thanks so much for having us. We're really privileged to be on your podcast this week. My name's Rayan. I just recently graduated my undergrad from Stanford and work in the area working on PlaygroundRL, which is a platform for evaluating expert large language models.
Yeah, I'm Langston. Also recently graduated from Stanford. And yeah, really excited to be working on this project with Rayan.
So Stanford, tell me more. We're definitely going to go deep diving into AI and LLMs and law. But let's just talk about how you got to be where you are. What were you doing at Stanford, and how did you find yourself choosing to be surrounded by lawyers?
Yeah, I guess it's also a bit of a story about how we met. Before Stanford, actually, there's a pre-orientation backpacking trip, and Langston and I were randomly assigned to be in the same group for this nice experience. And since then, we've just been close friends, taking classes together, and we were also hit by COVID in our undergrad, so we ended up living together in an Airbnb for a bit of it. But yeah, I think we're both very aligned in our interest in engineering and software, studying computer science. I was very interested in the research side of things, so I was working out of a few labs. And I think Langston was more on the big tech side and practically worked at half the big tech companies in the Bay. Yeah, I think we're working a lot together, but earlier this summer, I had published a paper related to evaluation for a healthcare setting, essentially where you're generating X-ray reports. And so we were trying to see if there were opportunities where we could take this exciting research and make it practical.
I love it. Langston, you want to tell me about that backpacking trip?
Yeah, it was actually before we had ever set foot on the Stanford campus as students. And Stanford runs this pre-orientation backpacking trip where they take a bunch of people who are about to be freshmen and they bring them out into the woods for 5 days and hope that they make friends with each other. And that's basically what happened.
I love it. They hope that you make friends.
Yeah, it doesn't always happen, but yeah, we bonded over shared interests, and we were both wanted to study computer science, and yeah, we've stayed in touch ever since.
Where did you guys go?
We actually went to Langston National Park, Northern California area.
Yeah, it's a spot to remember. It's very beautiful. A lot of volcanic activity and seeing new Earth come out and being hot and stinky. It's a beautiful place. Okay, let's talk about how you got up in the morning and chose to be in legal industry. You studied computer science at Stanford. Nothing in doing that, signals law, and then you written a research paper. I had a chance to look at it. I'm still trying to understand a few things. To be clear, I am very technical and had more math and science that most lawyers had, but I am still working through some of the stuff you've written there. And that was focused on the medical field. And yet you've chosen to focus on law. So why lawyers? And why do you think that specific research is helpful to lawyers?
Yeah, maybe we'll start with that second question. So essentially in this paper, we're looking at a setting in which you have a chest x-ray input and you're trying to produce a free text report. What's happening in the x-ray? What are the key insights that a pathologist should make use of? And existing forms of evaluation for this type of setting would just check that the words match. But actually, you care about a lot more important things in a clinical setting, like the diagnostic accuracy. If it's not actually finding that the patient had pneumonia, then really what's the point if some of the words match up? So the point of this paper is trying to say, like, how do we make a new evaluation metric for this setting, where we're able to capture some of the important details we care about looking for, and make sure that an actual pathologist would agree that this is a high quality report. It's a much harder challenge. So that was a healthcare setting, but basically we were seeing that there was at the same time an explosion of large language model methods and a lot of excitement around applying them to various use cases, especially in the Stanford area, everywhere in the world. So this research was very well timed because people were interested in adopting a similar technique for other domains. And so we were really excited to see if there was an opportunity to take the same evaluation setup and apply it more generally. And I think the legal industry is really exciting because of the sheer quantity of text that is written, read, and exists in history. And so it's a field that's very opportune for applying this technology. And as some of you may know from your law school days, there's so much cited material and reference material that makes it a good opportunity for us to see if we can verify the outputs generated are factually correct or not.
Interesting. I definitely remember my law school days, and I'm happy to report that I moved forward from those days. But yes, words are tools of trade for lawyers, and accuracy is very important. By the way, I have birds singing. It's still summer in California, for those folks are wondering. I have very active birds in my backyard, and I like to listen to them. So they're part of this podcast. And Langston, let's dive a little deeper. I do want to talk about LLMs and why they may be specifically good for something like law, or maybe not. I'm just curious, do LLMs have future in law?
Yeah, I think we're already starting to see that the law community is thinking about this, and we're seeing that in two ways. One, a study actually recently done by LexisNexis found that over 56% of lawyers at large law firms have already used an AI chatbot at least once. So we're already starting to see some usage. And secondly, we're seeing an explosion of different companies who are trying to solve various problems in law. So some examples of those are the classic ChatGPT as Copilot, but one that's like specifically an expert in the legal use case. And two, we're seeing AI tools assist in summarizing large corpuses of text, which is super useful for things like e-discovery. We're also seeing contract generation, contract redlining, and even some other niche things like generating billable hours narratives. And I think this is all, again, like Ryan said, there's just a tremendous amount of text, and LLMs thrive the best when they have a large body of text to work with. So especially when used intelligently in conjunction with humans, I think there is like a tremendous potential for LLMs to be used in the law field to like really accelerate lawyers' existing workflows.
You mentioned both sort of what I would say the substantive practice of law, but you also mentioned business of law, the management of law. So interesting to talk. Let's talk about actual applications. What do you, if you were to rank where to start, what is the most interesting given the capabilities of LLM models? What may be your top ones, or where would you like, where do you think that powerful tool of LLMs should be pointed to?
Yeah, I think there's a few that we're really excited about. One that I think is just emerging as the area in which the models are most capable is summary. So having a large corpus of text and summarizing and referencing the right legal precedent. I think e-discovery is a domain in which we may see a large adoption, because the previous techniques were just algorithmic, using things like regex to do searches. And a lot of groups are just bottlenecked by the number of paralegals they can assign to review all these documents. So in those sort of manual search retrieval operations, I think we'll see a lot of large language model usage. I think it could be exciting to explore areas in which models also do some of the argument construction. I think that's an area where people are very skeptical, but the models are actually somewhat creative. And so maybe if they can get better at constructing their own logical reasoning and argument, then that could be very exciting. But I'll just also leave the caveat that I don't think we're going to have any lawyers soon. I don't know if you wanted to add anything.
Yeah. We're not of the opinion that like AI will be replacing lawyers next month. We're of the opinion that AI is the super powerful tool, and that will be used by lawyers to be much more efficient and be able to do a better job, essentially. So our vision of the future is something like AI and humans working together to solve these problems in a similar way that a bunch of other like legal technology tools have been adopted.
Yeah, have you seen the news yesterday about a rapper who is essentially appealing his decision on the grounds that AI was used in closing argument, and that was essentially, I would say, in summary, malpractice? So, I thought it was an interesting take on current events, and opportunistic for this gentleman to try to have a second bite at the apple. I'm not saying it has merits. I'm just saying the guy is definitely tuned in into what's going on in the world. But that also shows that we're in the beginning of this technology and early, and people will be challenging it. I actually would like to talk a little bit more about what you're building and the piece that you will be contributing to LLMs. My understanding to make them more accurate, but feel free to correct me. What are you building and why? What problem does it solve?
Yeah, it's interesting that you bring that up, because we're definitely of the opinion that AI should be used responsibly, and you definitely should not just throw it out in a courtroom, and also that it should be like tested before it's used. So that's basically what we're trying to do.
Yeah, I was just going to add, I think I was reading about this company that wanted to let you put an AirPod in your ear and it would tell you everything to say in front of court. So at that point, it's really all the intellectual thinking done by this model, and you're just a human actor. I'm not really a lawyer. Maybe that's some vision of the future. I don't know.
It could be an input into your what comes out. Just because you have an input into a year doesn't mean that 100% comes out of your mouth. That would be some of the sort of pointers, real-time feedback, if you will. So that may be okay. But I agree with you that at the point that you essentially do not take it through a screen of human lawyer, you definitely have an ethical concern of unauthorized practice of law.
Right.
So I do think that there may be enough filter between the ear and the mouth, provided that there is a brain in the middle.
Exactly.
It may be okay in the hands of a responsible operator. But yeah, there is that. But let's talk about what you're building.
Yeah, let's do it. Yeah, so essentially, we were seeing this exciting time in large language models where so many different techniques are being developed. And a lot of people interested in applying this technology for the legal space. But there seems to be a core challenge across all of these domains, which is that it's exceptionally challenging to take a general purpose model, like a foundation model, and apply it to a specialized field where accuracy and safety is so important. And so this core challenge doesn't have a lot of clear solutions. It seems like in practice, there's a deep chasm between what engineers are doing and what kind of lawyers would review and use as the end users. The engineers like us, we might run a few spot checks just to check a few outputs that we think we know the answers to. But at the end of the day, we're not subject matter experts. Like, we don't know anything about law. And so we can't run a comprehensive check to make sure that the models are doing a good job or are actually getting worse. And then to a certain extent, once you develop the model more and are more confident in it, you can actually hire some in-house lawyers or hire some contractors to review the model and make sure it meets the quality expectations. But lawyers are super expensive, especially good ones, Olga.
Oh, we're gonna be friends. You called me a lawyer. Oh, Ryan, you just got to my warm heart. Thank you so much. You don't even know that, and you already made me a happy girl. Thank you so much. But yes, let's talk about the human in the loop and what investors call essentially a death spiral because of the inability to scale that expensive model, even if you put it in the jurisdiction where it's cost effective. Let's do it. That's a very important conversation.
So at a certain point, you just need a human to check that the outputs are good or bad, or evaluate based on their personal criteria whether they think it's ready for an end user to see. And so we're getting to a stage at which there's just a deep disconnect between engineers and lawyers. So our system sits at an intermediary between these two groups. And the goal is to try and relate the criterion that a lawyer would use to evaluate a model in the form of unit tests, which an engineer can run. And so rather than needing to wait for some human checker, very expensive process, not scalable, as you mentioned, this system would allow an engineer to just within an hour have a report generated that describes what went wrong, what could be improved, how a model might be developed.
Yeah, and if you think about it, even if you have to go to a lawyer like 50% less often to look at your LLM outputs, that's still a huge cost savings. So yeah, our vision is to just be able to generate a report, and it might say your model did well in this area, but it didn't perform as hot in this area. And we think that will be a super valuable tool in the arsenal of people who are developing these models for the legal space. To really make accurate and safe models.
Okay, this is a part of the show where we're gonna geek out. You said a few things, and they're of a lot of interest to me. Let's start with an easy one. Engineer-lawyer disconnect. I usually articulate it as a problem as I find them fascinating, but they just want to get rid of me. When I give legal advice, they just want Olga to go say yes and go away. They really don't care how profound they sound and what insights I share. But you tell me what that means to you. No pressure. That could be a very different explanation. When you talk about the engineer-lawyer disconnect, what is that? What is that problem?
Yeah, I think there's probably just like two areas where maybe like a knowledge gap and a skills gap. There's some things where an engineer might look at an output and just have no sense of what's being produced and how to make sure that it's right or wrong, how it can be improved, or how it just need to get to the level that a lawyer would be satisfied with the content of it. But I think there's also a deeper difference in the actual methodology that sometimes lawyers and engineers have. Engineers are trying to be very systematic. They want to be able to test a large number of inputs and have assurances on the types of outputs generated. But lawyers, they do things on a case-by-case basis. And once they have a sense of like how a model might perform, they have a deep sense of trust of whether or not they're going to use it or reject it. And so it makes for a very different planes that you have to try and relate one another to.
Okay, there's some chat going on. I'm gonna just highlight a few folks. Some folks really like to geek out. So hello, Sheila. And there are a lot of interest in our conversation. And then there's some questions about what if you're both? What if you're a lawyer and engineer in one body? Yeah, think about that. That it does exist. Hello, Kevin. And there's a lot of excitement about machine evaluating another machine and streamlining and do what engineers do, create systems for success as opposed to doing one at a time. So that brings me to a conversation. You mentioned something that I don't understand very well. You mentioned unit testing, what that means, and how do you think that will impact the sort of the scalability problem of human in the loop, right? I was recently listening actually a very useful video by A16Z where a lead partner in no uncertain terms was describing how a human in the loop is a death spiral to essentially a failed startup. And I think this is backed by a lot of research and pain in the field. You're proposing unit testing, which to me sounds machine to machine and systematic. And I'm hearing, as somebody who is a GC, churn CEO and revenue focus, I am hearing that we can overcome the death spiral. Tell me more.
Yeah, so for context, a unit test is essentially a way of evaluating if one small piece of your code is working how you want it to. Let's say you create some tiny part of your program that adds two numbers together. Then your unit test is you would use that program and maybe you'd say, what's 1 plus 1? And then that you would check the answers too. However, it's a lot more complicated for these machine learning approaches because you don't really necessarily know a right answer. If you ask it a question, there are many different possible answers that could all be equally correct. So it's not just as simple as comparing to see if two things match.
Yeah, I guess I'll just add on that and say that a system like this would allow us to take potentially infinite number of inputs you could give to a model and the potentially infinite number of outputs you could get and more systematically define the space of things you want to test it on. So it's not just an engineer checking a few things that they know the answer to and then expect getting something very different when they release the model. But actually now, before we release it, we can say, we generally expect answers and questions to fit in this range. And so we can systematically evaluate it on those.
Yeah, and finally, you mentioned scalability, and that's a really good point because that's definitely something that we're trying to unlock for the people who are using our platform.
Yeah, that's the difference between the scalability portion of it is the difference between startups having an opportunity to innovate and not, and therefore investors putting money into it and therefore helping the entire field. So the scalability portion of it is definitely important. And we have seen there have been a number of AI startups in law and with mixed results. And it is really that scalability accuracy trade-off, which is extraordinarily uncomfortable in the field of law. And having a debate which one is more important, but asking Olga, do you want to be beautiful or smart, when I really want to be both? Not a good conversation. The answer is both, in case you're wondering. Let's talk about trends. I am interested in what kind of trends do you see in evaluating this models? Like if we thinking about menu of options or what's available, what's coming up, what technologists, lawyers who are interested to build in this field should consider. What trends are you seeing? What trends are you exploring?
Yeah, I think one thing that we're seeing as a trend in the research, which really motivates a lot of our techniques, is a shift towards using more complex large language models as evaluators themselves. So originally in the field, there were techniques that use something called n-gram approaches. These are particularly interesting in translation. But if you have a generated piece of text, you compare it to a reference text and see how many words are overlapping, essentially. And that was a very primitive way to see when generated text was produced, was it meeting the expectation that you had before? But now we're using more complex things, like trying to measure the semantic meaning behind an output or a word and seeing if that relates to the right answer. And then there's an approach like ours, which is leveraging large language models to take a more holistic criteria or abstract notions of what's good and bad, and then evaluate outputs based off of that.
Yeah, also, I think the other trend that we'll see like a shift towards a set of industry standard best practices. So right now when people are creating these LLM for legal tools, there's really a wide range of stuff being done before release. Like it ranges from everything from very little testing and just putting like a beta sticker on it to like more complex natural language evaluation, similar to what we're trying to do. So we think that eventually there will be a set of best practices akin to an AI bar exam or something. And these will be the industry standard. Everybody will run them before they actually like release these models into the wild to be used by users.
Yeah, models in the wild. I want to see them frolic. I want them to help the lady justice to be kind and compassionate and help the world to be a better place. That is where I hope that the wilderness will take us. Very interesting discussion. I'm curious, what is it about LLMs that makes it so hard to verify that those models work? Is that sort of intrinsic? What problem are we solving and why? Why is that a problem?
I think you're right. Actually, it is an intrinsically hard language problem in the first place. If I show you a picture and you ask, is this a cat or a dog? It's pretty easy to see how accurate you are at identifying just that binary classification. But now if I give you two students and their essays and I ask you to grade them, there's an element of subjectivity to it, and it's much harder to have a systematic way to say what's a passing essay and what's not passing. And so I think this is something that we've just seen in the field as like a recurring problem, and it's still unsolved, really. There's no clear answer for how we evaluate these things.
And that if you have a text output, it's hard to even determine as a human if it's right or not, and it's even harder to do that automatically. But also, there's another component where the fact that this is the legal space makes it especially challenging. And this is something we've touched on earlier, where the engineers who are developing the model, we may look at an output and say, oh, that seems right. But really, if someone like Olga looked at it, she would see that there's pretty fundamental legal problems in the answer. However, Olga's time is very valuable, so we can't just have her look at every single output a given LLM produces. So there's an added difficulty in these expert use cases because there's only a small subset of people who have the skills and expertise to be able to do human evaluation for these LLMs.
So I once had a conversation with a well-known researcher at Stanford who explained to me in no uncertain terms that lawyers and engineers are basically the same people, except lawyers are confused people who made wrong career choices. That we essentially have a lot in common, and that we work with large texts, use logic, and create systems to succeed. Lawyers, unfortunately, do not have tools. And if you were to A/B test one group that is of a similar kind, making systematically better decisions because they have access to tools, and then you see another extraordinarily smart group using tools that are much more primitive and therefore losing their mind. So anyway, much more profound conversation. We are coming to the end. I have maybe a few more questions and that I want to consider before I say goodbye. One is about the issue of LLMs checking LLMs. You hit on sort of subjectivity, and it's actually maybe one thing worth considering how much lawyer does is truly subjective versus actually much more systematic but comes across subjective, and how much of it is actually systematic. That would be actually something I would love to study one day, the amount of subjectivity that happens. My hypothesis would be the subjectivity comes from the person I interact with. It's my ability to read what they're not saying and what I think they need and give them that, even if they're not asking the right questions. But I don't necessarily think that my legal advice is entirely subjective other than that component. I think it's actually fairly standardized most times. But that aside, I do want to talk about LLMs checking LLMs, sort of one from a technology point of view, because that's an important piece. Is that even possible? What does that mean? Can you take one distribution and transpose it on another? And will that actually inherently give you a better result? And two, the ethics of it. Does it solve the problem of supervision? Does it help us get to more accuracy? Bots supervising bots, does it get us anywhere?
Yeah, there's a few things to.
Sorry, a lot of questions, and I know how to ask one at a time, but sometimes I get really excited, so you get just questions. So you can pick and choose.
Yeah, I think I'll start with the first one of, is this even a really good idea of having language models evaluate another one? And I think there is actually really good reason to believe that this kind of technique is effective, because you find that models are able to correct mistakes that they make, and to find actually a form of reasoning when they see their own output framed with a new question or with additional context. They're able to identify errors or holes in their own original output. They're actually quite good at doing this type of reasoning. So I think there's good evidence that shows that when we give a certain context and ask it to explain issues or identify problems, it's capable of doing that. I think, although in some cases we're finding that models they actually show a preference for their own output. I guess there's a little bit of humanness in there, in that if we ask a model to say, look at this output, determine whether it's concise or not, it just has a high tendency to say that it is concise because it thinks its own outputs are good. And so there are ways to actually overcome this by more explicitly defining criteria. Concision means not having two sentences that say the exact same thing, things like that, or giving examples of what we consider to meet our mark for concision, or even using a mixture of experts where we have a crowded landscape of many different models, and so maybe we can have them as a consortium evaluating each other. So there's a reason to believe, I think, that this trend will have a huge impact to the field. But equally, I think there are some key challenges that people like us will have to try and solve.
Yeah, and there's also a precedent in this with how these models are trained originally, because models like ChatGPT are generally trained in part using something called RLHF, in which you take feedback from humans about which of two give different answers they prefer, and then you use that to essentially train a model to predict which outputs humans like more, and then you use that model to train your main model, essentially. So there's a lot of precedents of combining human feedback and models in interesting ways to get these really amazing results we're seeing. In terms of the ethics, I think the way we think about it is what we're building is one tool in the arsenal of the people who are building these models. So we don't think we can necessarily escape humans, but what we can do is create something that these developers can run before a human checks it. And they can do that much more cheaply. So you might show it to a human when you need to be absolutely sure if this is like ready to use in a real legal proceeding. However, you might use a model checking a model if you want to get an overall picture of how good a model is performing. Let's say you want to say, oh, it's 2% better than it was before. I think that's a really good use case for using a second LLM as the evaluator.
I'm still reflecting on the fact that it's like its own output better. How human of it. Isn't it adorable? Not only does ChatGPT flirt back with me, it also prefers himself. Nice. I love it. I have a last question. Let's talk about what needs to happen for this technology to be adopted. And I would say, let me ask it in two ways, because I think the standard may be different. What needs to happen for this technology to be adopted by broader public, which is largely underserved, like something like 95% plus cannot afford a lawyer in most cases. So what is the standard there? And what is the standard for lawyers, which is a higher standard, because every time you practice, you put your license on the line, you pride yourself for accuracy, completeness, and timeliness. What needs to happen for this technology to be adopted by, let's just say, those key populations?
This is, I think, a core question that we think about a lot. There's a few things that I'll just talk more generally, and then we'll try and split up into the broader public and the standard for lawyers. One, I think the field has this real challenge right now about needing to overcome a privacy performance trade-off. And so right now we're seeing that GPT-4 and the OpenAI models are exceptional, like the top of the line in a lot of these legal reasoning tasks. And yet there's a huge apprehension with using these models because there's a worry that OpenAI will take the data, use it for another training cycle, and will actually lose sensitive client data. And so now we're seeing open source models emerge as a solution to the data privacy issue, but see a huge hit in performance. And so I think we'll see development on both sides, where OpenAI will build more trust and build data silos in which they can actually support these sensitive data clients, and even catching up of open source models to things that GPT-4 are capable of. But that's a core issue that still stands and I think needs to be resolved for the technology to have adoption by both lawyers and the broader public as well. Another thing I think that people are talking about more these days is the actually surprisingly high cost of running these models. This is like a Ferrari model and you're using it to drive to the grocery store. So I think there's a lot of discussion about how we make the models more efficient for the particular use cases that we care about. And so that will have a huge impact on making models effective for the broader public, where cost is a big concern. There was an example we were looking at of this immigration chatbot. So there's just a huge barrier between the number of people who want to get immigration support and the number of lawyers who are capable or available to support them. And so it's a tool that is cost effective for people to use as a chatbot and still highly accurate will be massively effective for a large population like this. I guess the last thing I'll just bring up is I think we need to build more trust in the models, and we need to be, and the models need to be deserving of that trust as well. So there still remains a lot of, and actually that's exactly what we're aiming to solve with this platform is helping lawyers give evaluation of models so that models reach a certain standard, and then at that certain point, lawyers who are using it in practice will have the confidence that they can rely on these types of models.
Yeah. And in regard to your point about the broader public versus the standard for lawyers, I think there's actually another way of thinking about it. And for a lawyer, if they are using this like LLM, they actually are able to review the output and they know if it's giving like good legal advice or if there's like legal inaccuracies because they're like a trained professional. However, someone from a broader public might not necessarily know this. And so if they like use some sort of LLM tool to generate, let's say like a contract or an NDA or something, they might not know what to look for. So actually in some ways that standard might be reversed.
Interesting. Thank you for challenging me. I love that. It's my favorite thing when I'm challenged, and there's a very active chat. I have a couple of follow-up questions. Rayan, you mentioned privacy performance trade-off. Tell me more about that. Tell me what I'm just curious what that means and practically and in the context of lawyers and accuracy and trust.
Yeah, I can speak a bit more. I think legal is partially such a challenging field to develop technology because there are rightly very strict restrictions on how data can be stored and passed on. And so I think there was a similar issue related to cloud technologies a little bit before my time, admittedly. But lawyers and law firms were actually very apprehensive about using public cloud setups where the data would actually leave their servers and go to some kind of shared space. But now today, I think it would be really hard to imagine a time when legal like platforms cannot use Google Drive or Google Sheets and things like that to store a lot of data. And so I think similarly, we're seeing a lot of wariness from lawyers and law firms in using large language models. And it's because people are worried that the data that they have for their clients will be leaked or will be exposed to other ways that they're not prepared to deal with. And so I think it's a real concern. And so people are trying to see if there are opportunities to use other forms of large language models that are open source. And so this would be more like installing software locally in a law firm. It would be like taking a model and keeping it running and provisioned within the law firm itself. And that certainly is an option that I think will be developed more in the future, but it does take a big performance hit compared to the GPT-4 type models. So that's the trade-off that we're seeing in the early days. But I think we'll see a version of the future in which, yeah, OpenAI is able to build trust, but also the open source models get better as well.
Yeah. I think OpenAI is actually building something they call OpenAI for Enterprise, in which they essentially promise that they will not use the data you send them to train their model. But even we'll see if that's promise is enough for people to start trusting OpenAI versus we might still see some wariness in the years to come.
Yeah, the world of law is the world of private data. Because if you look in the context of litigation, while you have a lot of filings, that is less than 95% of stuff that is going on. Most things are settled. They're in depositions that are private, not public. It's a world of private data. You have exactly the same thing in contracts. Sure, there's a few contracts that are filed with Ks and Qs with SEC. Those are outliers. Those are not common contracts. Most contracts you never see the light of day. They're mostly never litigated in court. They never filed their private document. We're talking about the world of private data, and expecting that disclosure will happen at some point is somewhat naive. I actually plan to be done by now, but I actually do have a few questions. So there you go. We're going to stay a little longer, and I see a very active chat. Brian, you said something what I thought was really enlightening is that the models need to earn trust. And then you, Langston, said, Olga, you said that the standard for underserved public, while they have a higher need, should be actually higher because you're dealing with vulnerable population that actually doesn't even know how to always ask the right question. And then I'm seeing chat where there's a lot of questions around what if you test, you do unit testing, you create a system, and you identify a mistake. Do you bring the lawyer? Like, how do you resolve that? And we talk machine to machine. And then at what point you need to bring human? Do you ever need to bring human? What is the path? Okay, I actually know how to formulate a question. Let me ask you that. What is the path for helping LLMs in law to earn trust? I know that's an easy question, total fluff.
Yeah, let's see. I think there's maybe two answers which I would have. The first one is we probably need systems in place that are similar to how we establish human trust. When I go out to hire a lawyer, I make sure that they've passed the bar exam, and maybe I have recommendations from other friends who have worked with that lawyer, and I have experience of the types of work that they've done before that I can use to judge. And so similarly, I think we'll see some parallels in models like this in which we have to have some system in place where we give certifications and checks that make sure that it meets the threshold at which they're ready to be used and actually developed in practice. And I think there'll be some system by which other people can provide feedback and suggestions and recommendations of their experience with a model. And so a form of trust will probably be built up over time like that. I think there's a second answer, which is something a little bit more, what I describe as more like top down, like we have a review committee or maybe certification process. The other one is probably more bottom up, and it's something which will happen organically through time, which is that lawyers need to have a reliable concept of what the outputs the model will give, and it'll actually meet the standard that they expect. There's actually a parallel to this in the healthcare industry where people were looking at so actually I'll just give the quick anecdote and try and summarize research finding. But essentially there was this chest x-ray diagnosis tool, which was of a higher accuracy than the x-ray radiologists themselves. But when the same radiologists used this AI tool in practice, their accuracy rates fell. And it was because they were either too trusting or not trusting enough of the outputs that the model gave. So they were either relying too much in cases where they shouldn't have been, or they were flipping the results because they didn't believe the model was giving a good answer. And so I think there probably needs to be some kind of training or some kind of slow entry of the models into practice in which the lawyers have similarly built up a sense of what are the things that the models are capable of doing, what are their strong suits and weaknesses. And so then how do I really judge in cases in which they'll make the best decision or give the best output? And that's a bit nebulous, that what I just described, but I think another form of trust that will be built up over time.
Yeah, and we also might see retrieval augmented generation help with this a little bit, because when you're using retrieval augmented generation, your LLM is looking at a large corpora of documents, and it's basically choosing out text from that to use in its answer. So when it does this, it actually cites the original source text. So I think it helps to build trust is being able to actually look at that original source text and see if it matches what the LLM is telling you or not.
Okay. I'm tempted to ask more questions, but I will stop because no episode should be more than 50 minutes. That's very burdensome for a listener. So I'm going to come to a conclusion, and thank you.
We'll do a part 2 at some point.
We can do a return. We can definitely do a repeat. Let's do it again. I'm going to thank you. This was very helpful and thought-provoking. And I love how when my engineering conversations reach sort of the meaning of life, a moment. And I think we're there. We are at a question of what it means to trust and how you earn it. That is a very human question for an engineer to ask. And I love that we end on this. So part of my goodbye will be to ask you to tell the viewers what is the one thing you want them to take away from this conversation, whether it's an action or a thought or something else that you want to make sure that, because we covered quite a lot of ground and You guys have been very enlightening, and I really thank you for being here. But what is the one thing each of you wants the viewers and listeners to take away?
Yeah, on my end, this is mainly for engineers like me who are thinking about building an LLM for law or healthcare. I would just encourage you to think about how you're going to test if it's good or not, because that's such a huge component of developing new systems and making them useful.
I think the other thing that I'd add is we're at a really exciting point in both the legal and the engineering side space. And so we certainly have our view of how things are going to progress, but I think everyone needs to be thinking a little bit about how we're going to evaluate these systems and what it looks like in high-stakes situations.
I love that. How do you earn trust? And with that in mind, thank you so much, everyone, for joining.
And that brings us to the end of another thrilling episode on the Notes to My Legal Self AI Insights. We had a fantastic time exploring the fascinating intersection of law and AI with you. But hold on tight, because the adventure doesn't stop here. Stay connected with us on social media to continue the conversation, share your thoughts, and be part of our incredible community of legal enthusiasts. Together, we can inspire, learn, and make a real impact on the world of law and AI. If you enjoyed today's episode, we encourage you to share it with your friends, colleagues, and anyone else who could benefit from the exciting insights we discussed. Let's spread the knowledge and enthusiasm far and wide.